Welcome to Passing the Plate, the podcast that's all about food, traditions, and the wonderful connections they create. I'm Lisa Lisson, the genealogist and family history expert behind Are You My Cousin?
And I'm Ashley Covelli, the food writer and recipe developer behind Big Flavors from a Tiny Kitchen. We'll be your guides on this flavor-packed adventure. We're not just talking about recipes. We're diving into family history, exploring new cultures, and preserving favorite recipes for future generations. In short, we're celebrating the stories and tastes that come with every bite.
So grab a seat at the table and let's embark on a journey of flavor, tradition, and connection. This is Passing the Plate, where every episode is a feast for the senses and a celebration of the ties that nourish our souls. We are thrilled to be celebrating Family History Month, and by the way, it's National Cookie Month, two of our favorite things. We have a special guest with us today to talk about her family food stories and how to track down those family recipes.
Louise Cooke is the author of several books, including The Genealogist's Google Toolbox, 3rd edition. She produces and hosts the popular Genealogy Gems podcast, founded in 2007, and publishes weekly videos at the Genealogy Gems YouTube channel. She offers a premium membership service at her website at lisalouisecooke.com. That's with an E at the end of Cook, featuring exclusive on-demand genealogy education. And she writes a regular column for Family Tree magazine and produces the Family Tree magazine podcast. So Lisa, you don't sound busy at all.
I was going to say, I'm tired now. I need to go take a nap after all that.
Now that we've gotten to know a little more about you and your background, I'd love to know more about how you got interested in cooking. Do you remember the first thing that you cooked?
You know, I was a baker. Not as much a cook, but baking. And my mom wasn't much of a cook either. I don't think she'd mind me saying that. You know, things were just kind of like in cans, and they were hot. And they were brown a lot of the time. But
brown
she was an amazing,
delicious.
Yeah, but she was an amazing baker. And you probably know, cooking and baking are kind of different animals.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a little more scientific, and yet there is such artistry that can fit into it. So I enjoyed baking as a kid. I actually, when my kids were really little, I did wedding cakes out of my home for a couple of years. So I always want to bring in the creative stuff to food. So I really enjoyed doing that. And I did cookie decorating. I still love decorating cookies, and I was doing that way before it got super popular. And then it's funny, about 5 years ago, I was so busy. I was traveling so much. I ended up getting one of those food services. I think it was Blue Apron. And shockingly, I learned how to cook by following Blue Apron recipes. And I could start to see the pattern of it. I could see how you could swap things out. And my husband now says he won't take me out to dinner because he says it's not as good as what you're making at home. But it's so funny to have learned from that. And it's actually made cooking fun. So I get to do both now.
I think that's great. And honestly, even though I come up with recipes on my own a lot, I use those services about once a month. I kind of rotate through the different ones, but it's a great way to explore a new cuisine without committing to buying a giant jar of some ingredient that you're never going to use, or to try a new ingredient, or, to hone your skills on something. I think that's great. I'm curious about the wedding cakes. What is the most intense cake that you ever made?
Oh gosh.
Or just most proud, or
yeah. Well, the intense cake was intense for the scale of it. Okay. It was 4 tiers tall. There were 4 side cakes. They were huge. And they wanted chocolate frosting on the outside, and it was all white intricate lace work on top of that, which was beautiful. So that's one of my favorites. But the intensity, really, that story is about delivery, because you make the cake, but then you have to get it there. Yeah. And if something happens, there is no time, 3 days more to go back and make it again and deliver it. So I was living in Washington State at the time, and we had to deliver a cake out to Snag Island and on a flatboat.
Oh, no.
It was a speedboat. And so I had not considered this. So my husband is we get it safely to the dock, and we're there's no cover on this boat. And this guy's get it on here. Let's skid, we're going to skid over to the island. And so we had these cakes in the open air boat with the sea breeze splashing. I said, well, it's a very authentic, Puget Sound type of wedding cake, because it had a little bit of sea spray on it. And then we had to unload it. And this island was basically a rock. So the venue was up on the top of this thing, and we had to haul it up these craggy steps, and just getting it there, that was the most intense situation we'd ever had.
I have to say, for all of the like cake decorating shows that I've watched in the past, I don't think I ever saw a boat delivery. So I feel like that's like the crowning achievement.
It was
there.
Way out there.
Yeah.
I do remember the only cake I ever lost was I really enjoyed doing the birthday cakes because I was doing all that rolled fondant stuff before Cake Boss ever came out. And because this was years ago when my kids were little, but we delivered the cake, put it in the back of the car, no problem. But they lived again in Washington State at the top of this almost mountain. And we drove it to the top. And by the time we got out and opened the back of the car, the whole top layer had slid off because I had raspberry filling in the middle. And it was nice and slippery. And I didn't see that coming. Didn't see that coming.
No.
Yeah. I don't think I would have seen that coming either.
I feel like the stress level of that is just too much for me. Like,
yes, I got
and then
out
you
of
have
it
to
as soon as I could afford to.
And then you have to like reassemble, like for a tiered cake, you have to then like assemble it at the venue under a time constraint, and like, wow.
And I would design typically flowers on the cakes as well. You know, so you're designing other elements onto the cake.
Wow.
And it's all put together. But it was fun.
So my daughter got married a couple months ago, and we were talking about wedding foods in one of our previous episodes, and the wedding cake was so different what the young girls are doing or couples are doing now, is they are not doing these as many of these elaborate cakes. Some do, but they tend to get the smaller cake, and then they're just serving sheet cake or cupcakes to the guest. Which I thought was really, because I was like, okay, I've got to find somebody. I was all geared up. I'm ready. Got to find somebody to get the cake, and who's going to pick it up. You know, I was already mom mode, thinking forward with this. She's like, Mom, we don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Then I felt old, but at that point.
Well, and they don't necessarily pipe roses anymore. I learned that skill and could make the roses and then leaves. And they're like, oh, that looks so fake. I don't want that. You know, so you're right. It's actually these, I don't know if they call them bachelor cakes or the big sheet cakes on the side. And they want those to be wild, elaborate, you know, story cakes. So that's fun too.
Yeah.
It is fun.
Trends are interesting like that.
I did do my daughter's wedding cake 2 years ago. And I was amazed she trusted me with it.
I'm sure you did. It was beautiful, I am sure. But just, I think just like we see foods, you know, Ashley has helped educate me on some of the food trends as we come forward, and taking some of our old family recipes and how to modernize them so they're more, you know, in line and things that we can use today. I would love to hear from you. I know you and I have talked previously about food-related stories, and you had mentioned you had some really interesting serendipitous type food-related stories within your family history. I'd love to hear one of those.
Oh, absolutely. But this one, when I got married, my husband would rave about his grandma's sour cream drop cookies. I'm like, well, that sounds easy. I'm a baker. And I whip some up, and he would say, oh, those are good. Yeah, that's not like grandma's. Oh, okay. And then I find another recipe down the year. He said, oh, those are tasty. Not like grandma's, but you know, they're good. And oh my gosh. So for 25 years, I had gone on and on, almost 30 years, looking for this recipe. So I was at a event I was speaking at. Of course, I teach about how to find your family history and do genealogical work. And so I was with the Genealogy Society in California and speaking to their group. And I'm talking about my husband's family in Winthrop, Minnesota, which is a little tiny town. It's maybe got 1,300 people in it. And his family had basically kind of founded that town back in the 19th century. So anyway, somehow that came into the conversation. I was talking about during the presentation. And afterward, a lovely little lady, probably 80 years old, came up to me. Her name was Harriet. And she said, oh, Lisa, I have a cookbook from Winthrop, Minnesota in Sibley County.
Gosh.
Wow.
And I'm like, you do? And she's like, it's not anything to do with my family. My sister gave it to me. I think she was teaching out there years and years and years ago. Would you like me to send it to you? And I said, oh, yes, that'd be wonderful. So I gave her my address and she sends me this book. So the book shows up in the mail and I'm looking through it and it's, I can tell you, this is the Minnesota Swedish Genealogical Society, I think, had gotten together with the local church, the Lutheran church, and they had published this thing, oh gosh, probably back in I'm looking for the date, around 1930, I think it was. It was one of those spiral bound, church cookbooks. And so I'm racing through it looking, and I find sour cream drop cookie recipe. But it's not Larson, which is my husband's family name. It's this Mrs. Hulda Anderson. So I'm like, oh my gosh. But I did find recipes from his grandmother and his great aunt and all kinds of people in the family. So I'm a genealogist, Lisa. So you know what I did? Of course, I went to the census.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm looking, and there's Mrs. Anderson, the next door neighbor. Now, wouldn't that be logical that the ladies would be, of course, bringing forth their favorite recipes, the ones they're known for, but they're swapping recipes amongst themselves. And so it was just such a reminder to me that, we can get super focused on our family names, but in reality, we have to think about people in the context of their neighborhood and their friends and their family. And it was just amazing. So, of course, I whipped up this recipe and my husband's jaw just about dropped. He's like, those are my grandmother's sour cream drop cookies.
That's amazing.
So, the moral of that story is just never give up because you never know. And talk about it. Talk about what you're dealing with, what you're looking for. Put it out there. Throw out the names and the places. I never expected somebody, 2,000 miles away from Winthrop, Minnesota, a half a century later to have this little book that had the answer. But it's just a treasure now.
I love that story. And I know I have a couple of things that kind of explode in my mind when you're about all the different things, but I love that last thing, that we have to talk about those recipes and talk about what we're interested in, because it does tend to our ancestors, when we're looking at our family history, they did not live in isolation. They did not live in a bubble. Mrs. Larson, Grandma Larson had a neighbor named Mrs. Anderson. And so and what did women do? Same thing we do today. We share recipes. We talk about what we were doing. And so,
absolutely.
And your story brings up two questions. One, can you please email me that recipe? It sounds delicious. And two, is there, do you remember what the difference was? Was there one main thing that was different between the recipes you had tried and what the recipe ended up being?
Yes. Well, I can tell you that the recipe for everybody listening is on my website.
We'll link it in the show notes if you want to send the link.
The blog post was called Family History Never Tasted So Good.
Nice.
You will see a picture of great-grandmother Larson and the whole backstory of this. The recipe book was called Home Tested Recipes from the First Lutheran Church of Winthrop, Minnesota. And I have the recipe on there. And actually, I think one of the key things was she included nutmeg, which didn't come up in a lot of the recipes that I did. And also, it said 1 cup chopped raisins or dates. And I found
those are very different.
They are.
Yeah.
And I found that the dates seem to kind of hit the mark with him. So,
nutmeg is interesting like that. I feel like it's A, a little underused, and B, it can really, I love putting it in beet greens or a spinach, in something with greens. It adds something a little extra that you can't really put your finger on what it is, but it just brings out more flavor somehow. And then there's also the difference between pre-ground nutmeg and if you have the whole nutmeg spice that you can grind on a microplane. So I keep both, and the whole ones last forever because a little bit goes a long way. But yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad you were reunited with this recipe.
Oh, me too.
Or that he was reunited.
You think about the time frame. That's a really good point, Ashley. You have to ask yourself, okay, back in 1930, was she buying McCormick's nutmeg off the shelf at Safeway, or was she grinding it originally? And probably, the actual nutmeg and grinding it herself. And so if we really want to mimic it, we have to think about what did that woman have at her disposal in that time.
That's interesting because my grandma, I don't think ever had a whole spice. She was born in 1920, but I remember a lot of spices in her kitchen, and they were all like the metal tins with like, you could open the one side, the lid would have for a spoon, and then the other side would be a little shaker. I don't think she ever used a whole spice.
So then you'd want to, definitely use the store-bought stuff.
I'm curious about, you said that the recipe called for either chopped raisins or dates, and that the dates seemed to be what your husband, that flavor profile he remembered. So I'm curious about the using chopped dates versus the option of using chopped raisins. It sounded like your husband remembered the date profile, flavor profile better. Was that something that would have been easier for them to get? I don't know if that area would have been an area where they would have grown either one of those.
Exactly.
Much.
Well, it's interesting, one, that she specified that option. And so that tells me, there probably was some unique ability to get that in that area. They were close to the railroad. I know that. I know that her husband was in retail. He was in a lumber and hardware business. So I don't know if they had connections. But here's a little tip if you wanted to do a little bit of research to figure that out, is you go back and hit the Winthrop newspapers from that time frame, which are all available online, and just do a search on dates, recipes. I was talking to somebody over at newspapers.com, and they were talking about looking at pineapple. And when Alaska was becoming a state, all of a sudden, everything was about pineapple. And you could kind of see almost the history where there's no mention of it. And then all of a sudden, there's 16 million recipes that include pineapple in the 1950s. So sometimes the newspapers can kind of give us some of the backstory as to why dates. Oh, it turns out that the store next door to the hardware store all of a sudden got, a special deal, or had just moved here from an area that had them. Who knows?
This is what I love about this podcast, is coming at it now with two Lisas, with two genealogy researcher perspectives, just things that I would have never thought about. And just like interesting ways to kind of get more information behind the story on these things. That's so interesting. And I do have one more recipe related question. Mm-hmm. So I recently had to use chopped dates in something, and they are sticky and messy, delicious. Yes. Did it have you like cut them and then kind of toss them with the dry ingredients so that it kind of disperses better and you don't end up with a clump of dates?
It didn't say, but the fact that it was in that or raisins, I kind of shot for mimicking raisins.
Yeah.
Right. How big are they? How much would I chop them? I were going to chop them. And I don't know, but as I recall, I don't know if I'd used flour or sugar, but I'd kind of put some on my hands and then wrinkled them between my fingers, which seemed to kind of help them separate.
Yeah, I know that's a good tip for like anything kind of sticky in a recipe where you have the dry ingredients, is you toss it in there and it'll help it kind of not all fall to the bottom or stick in one place. So, yeah, really cool story. Thank you.
I have one other really quick story that is kind of kitchen culinary related.
Okay.
Totally different. It's not a recipe, but I inherited this cookie jar from my grandmother, on my father's side. And it's this beautiful cream-colored, big, robust lady with a little hat, and she looks like she's in the kitchen, but it's a big cookie jar. And I don't know what we were doing, but somehow I ended up talking with an antique appraiser. And it's funny when you think about things that you've inherited from different people in your family. Can they tell you anything about them? Well, she looks at this cookie jar, and I said, "Oh, I wonder what it would be worth." And she's like, "I don't know, but was your grandma kind of a clean freak?" And I said, yeah, like, what are you channeling her? She was kind of OCD. She was just, everything was meticulous and had to be wiped down as soon as she touched her canisters. I still have her canisters. And I said, "How did you know that?" And she's like, "Well, this cookie jar actually used to be fully painted in color. She has scrubbed every last speck of paint off this cookie jar." And I thought, that is so funny. Who knew that even just a kitchen utensil or something that we have had handed down to us actually could tell us little secrets about our ancestors' personalities. If I had never met her, that would have been interesting to know.
I feel like the Lisas, the royal Lisas, there's a lot of overlap between the investigating you do and like a crime scene thing. So if you're ever feeling like doing some sort of career change, forensics, I feel like you would just knock it out of the park.
Well, it's funny you say that, Ashley, because I do a presentation. It's probably one of my most popular, and it's about how to solve a cold case. And I do it totally off of my binging of forensic files and watching and documenting the methodology that they use and saying, how can a genealogist use that same methodology? And of course, my daughter went into forensic anthropology.
Oh, that's fantastic. Is that something that we can link to in our show notes, or is it something you only do live?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually that full-length presentation with the cheat sheet and everything is part of the premium membership. So if people check out the website and they like it and they become a member, they could definitely watch that.
Very cool.
Well, I think that is something that Lisa and I do. And I actually learned a lot of my skills from Lisa, listening to her podcast. But it is that getting into our ancestors or that family members' head to really understand. I talk a lot about, like what they like to eat and what foods show up on the table. That's all part of gathering clues about their personality and their heritage and, what was important to them as a group. And when we understand that as a researcher, when we understand what our families liked and how they made their decisions, then it helps us be able to put that history together in a much more personal way than just names and dates on, say, a chart.
Absolutely.
And I love the personal side. Yeah.
Yeah.
Always. Are you worried your family recipes will be lost to time? Imagine generations gathering around your family, sharing stories, and enjoying dishes passed down for years. With the Passing the Plate video webinar and ebook bundle, you can make that happen. You'll learn how to capture those cherished recipes before they're lost from memory, uncover the secrets and heartwarming stories behind each dish, and connect you to your family's history in a powerful and delicious way. To learn more, head to passingtheplate.org/resources. So, Lisa, I have a question. You had this wonderful story, and it took you 25 years to find that recipe. Do you have other ideas for seeking out old family recipes that pop up in your research?
Absolutely. Well, I have to say, one of my real favorites is old newspapers. And you might think, well, my ancestors, my great-grandmother was not well known or famous or anything, but, they needed to fill space in newspapers. And they weren't famous, and yet they got published in cookbooks. So why would they not necessarily be published in the newspaper? And particularly if they were involved, like I used to put all my stuff in the state fair, so if you lived somewhere where that was a highlight and would be highlighted in the newspaper. But newspapers can help you not only find actual relatives' recipes, but if you are looking to recreate one or you've heard about one and you don't have the tangible recipe, go back and not just look in the newspaper, but look in their newspaper. So I would go back to, Chowchilla, California, where my great-grandparents were from, and I would go search their newspaper for recipes. Because again, maybe their neighbor or a distant cousin or somebody had something published or shared something in the newspaper. And of course, that just became a very popular column through the 20th century, having published recipes. So chances are that even though your ancestor didn't write it or create it, they clipped it right out of the newspaper, and you will find ones there that kind of fit into your family history. And one thing you can do when you're searching newspapers, and there are so many now, so many more online digitized than there used to be. Don't just search for, in particular, a woman. If you're looking for your great-grandmother, you're not really going to look for Lillian Larson. I'm going to look for Mrs. L.J. Larson. Because again, the time frame, that's oftentimes how they were referred to. And oftentimes it was the husband, but even the first initials and the last name with the husband. So put the Mrs. in front of there and play with that. And you can typically use search operators to help you kind of nail that down. So you could put, quotation marks around it to try to see if that exact phrase shows up in a digitized newspaper, like check out the ones for free at Chronicling America at the Library of Congress. Oh my gosh. I'm sure there's hundreds of thousands of pages there, and that's a wonderful place. I did do a blog post on that, finding family recipes in old newspapers on my website. And it's phenomenal. Like I said, not just the recipes you could find, but the history of a recipe, or if you're not familiar with the terminology or the name of a recipe or how they did it, you can look up other recipes from the same time frame, same location, and see if you can kind of piece things together. Interestingly, at archive.org, which is the Internet Archive, they have the cookbooks and home economics collection. That is over 10,000 vintage cookbooks now.
That's
10,000.
Awesome.
So we're talking all the church, books, all the community books, the society books. That if it got printed up, even if it was just Xerox and there were 2 copies, there's a chance that it's over at the Internet Archive. So that's called the Cookbooks and Home Economics Collection. If you type that in the search field over at archive.org, you can search those. And those are keyword searchable, and they are downloadable oftentimes. You can, flip through the pages. They're all fully digitized, so it's just tremendous. And you might also want to look and see who posted those individual ones. If you find some that you really go, wow, this is the right place and worth pursuing, check and see who uploaded it to Internet Archive. It'll tell you, and then go pursue their website and go check out what else they've got going on. And Google Books, Google Books is not just books, it's anything printed and stuff that was in the public domain, which is the older materials. Those are often digitized, and you'll find old vintage cookbooks on there as well. You might even find a newsletter or a magazine or an almanac or catalog, something that even refers to your ancestor or recipes they had or cookbooks they were involved in. A lot of times I found a lot of catalogs that will list books being published. So the book itself is not there, but you can find it listed in this publication of publications, if you will. And then that gives you a title of a cookbook or something to go look for, maybe using Google. It's funny, using Google is probably a key too, because I was doing a search and I found that the National Library of Medicine actually has like 59 vintage cookbooks on it. I don't know why, but they do. So Google searching is a great way to find stuff like that.
I wonder if part of that is like how, certain, like Coca-Cola even, right? Certain beverages were seen as like medicinal originally, right?
Yes.
So that could be, maybe that's how some of that overlap started. But that's so interesting. And I love those tips. And I foresee many internet like rabbit holes that I'm going to be falling down. And I'm not mad at it. So thank you so much for those tips. So we love also, Lisa and I, sharing tips for recording family recipes. Have you come across any particularly handy tips or tricks when it comes to documenting and saving recipes from your loved ones?
Absolutely. Not so much. I mean, I know, Ashley, you're kind of an expert on documenting and really figuring out what the pieces and the ingredients and all of that stuff
I try.
goes into a recipe. Yeah, reconstructing it. However, the part that I really love doing is the sharing part. When I finally find the recipe, and I was very fortunate, I inherited old cookbooks. I've inherited my mother-in-law's entire recipe card box. And I have lots of utensils and all kinds of things. I just love that kind of stuff. So it's important to me to find ways to be able to share them. And so here's just some ideas that maybe your listeners would want to try. If you go over to Etsy, Etsy.com, you could digitize the recipe that you have. And I love the ones that are in my ancestors' actual handwriting. Those are the best.
Yeah.
And you can get that made up in fabric. So whether it's a yard of fabric or a bolt of fabric, they will print that up and just repeat it over. And now you've got fabric to make gifts for Christmas time or the holidays. Birthdays, you could do aprons, dish towels, placemats. I just think it's a tremendous idea to be able to hand to my daughter or now my granddaughter and say, here's an apron, and that's, my great grandmother's recipe in her handwriting. In fact, I was traveling to speak down in the hill country here in Texas, and I always stop by little, antique stores and one-of-a-kind kind of hole-in-the-wall restaurants and places. And I stopped at this little bakery cafe, and the whole thing was developed around the owner's family heritage of food. And they had lived on this farm. It was at the front of the farm on the main road. And her wallpaper was the recipes.
Oh, how fun.
Yes.
Wow.
So think about anything that you can print on. There's somebody out there who can do it custom for you. You get it digitized. She had them blown up. And if you didn't want to do wallpaper, you could just blow it up like a poster for $10. You can go to some of these poster companies and they'll send that to you. And then you could do it on the small scale. You could do greeting cards. And I love the idea of my daughters. I've got 3 daughters, and they're always looking for new gadgets and utensils and things as gifts. So having the card or the tag that's attached to the gift saying it's from me, but on the backside is, again, a printed recipe or something. And even better, add a little photograph of the family member if you have it, and include that as well.
Can you imagine how our even grandmothers, but let alone great, great, great grandparents, what they would think if they knew that, like, what if it was some recipe that it was just like a one-off, whatever, I just need to get this thing. And now we're blowing it up on wallpaper.
Yeah.
Technology's wild. I love it.
It is.
I've said that about my grandmother and her cornbread recipe. If she knew I put her on her video on the internet or on YouTube, she might come haunt me. Or she might go, "Way to go, girl!" Or she might be saying, "I'm really not crazy about my hair that day. Why'd you do that?" Kind of thing. But,
on the flip side of that, though, just knowing how many people have experienced it because we have shared it out there publicly, just so cool.
Well, the fun thing about having things on the walls, I have little vignette displays around my house of things that are all family history related, is that when somebody comes into your home, one, they know that's something you're passionate about. And so often it will facilitate a conversation. And more times than I can remember, a family member has walked in the house at the holidays or something, and they'll spot something that I've now put up on the wall or whatever, and they'll remember something. Now, I've asked them before, and they're like, "Oh, I don't know, can't remember a thing. That was ages ago." But sometimes those physical items or visual items will spark those, and that's grab your phone, turn on the recorder, and just start talking to them.
Yeah.
Because that's a wonderful treasure in that moment.
Absolutely. I often say that we need to incorporate all 5 of our senses when it comes to genealogy. So it's not just our research skills and but it's the things that we see and we can talk, and our taste that trigger those memories trigger those memories of our families to get those conversations going. Because you remember things you might not remember otherwise once you have that cookie, that favorite cookie in the mouth kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
I remember way back in the first year of my podcasting, and welcome to podcasting, ladies.
Oh, thank you.
I've been doing this since 2007, and it's a ton of fun. And I remember the first year I did a show about the fact that I had gone to the local 5 and Dime. Do they still call them that? I don't know. Walgreens. And they had a whole bin of chocolate bars, and they were real cheap. And I thought, okay, I'll just put one in every Christmas stocking. So I bought a whole bunch of them and got them home, and 1 or 2 of the labels had fallen off, like the glue had unstuck. So they were still covered in foil, but the labels came off. I ended up going, oh, well, there's an opportunity. And I ripped all the labels off, and I measured it and designed back in Microsoft Publisher. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And I designed my own candy bar label, which was, I called it Sweet Memories. And I put a photograph and a story about my grandmother, and the list of ingredients were all the adjectives I could think of that described what sitting around the family table was like with my grandmother. and rewrap them, use a little bit of double-sided tape to reattach them and put them in each of the stockings. And I tell you, ladies, the conversation that happened amongst my family members, it was just so much fun to have them just, their eyes light up. That's what they wanted to talk about, was the candy bars. And I had photos of Christmas from, 60 years ago on them. And it was a lot of fun. So, get to them through their stomach.
I love that. And then tangentially related, because I've had my website writing about food and recipes since 2006. So you've been podcasting almost as long as.
Yes.
And the way things have changed, for food websites and blogs and everything, have you noticed any or has there been any huge changes in podcasting that really stood out to you over that? Because I imagine podcasting was very different in 2006.
It was. You spent your whole time just trying to explain to people how to get into iTunes and how to be able to find your podcast.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it was so foreign. So I would sit in conferences and just over and over explain to people how to even find them. Back then, I always approached mine like a variety show. So that's what I grew up with Mike Douglas, and you probably don't remember the Mike Douglas show, Ashley, but all these different variety shows. And so they kept you interested because things were in segments, but there was always a variety of ideas and topics, and I would do that. And now that drives people crazy because they want, within the first 30 seconds, to hear that you're right now on that topic, and that's the topic you're going to talk about, which is great. That makes sense.
Right.
And it's easier to search for the episode that you want to listen to.
That is very true.
But it was a lot of fun back then to really do that wide variety. I would do genealogy news, and I would do tips, and I would tech tips, and I would do an interview segment. And, I think attention spans are evolving and changing.
I have a 12-year-old. I can absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and somebody once told me, your YouTube videos are way too long. No one's going to sit for that. But, in the genealogy culture, it takes at least an hour to really dig into anything to be worthwhile, to actually go there. So I'm trying to find ways to modify to shorten things up and let people take more bites of ideas.
Well, you can always listen at 2 times speed. That's what I do on podcasts
There you
and
go.
stuff. Or some YouTube videos, unless they talk fast like me, and then I 1.5 maybe.
That explains why everybody's talking so fast. Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Lisa. Let people know where they can find you online.
You bet. You can find me at my website. You can get there through LisaLouiseCooke with an E.com or genealogygems.com, because we try to help you find those little gems that are out there hiding. I also have the Genealogy Gems YouTube channel, so we publish it out there. And of course, the free podcast, and members of my website actually also get a premium podcast. So that one's exclusively for them, as well as some videos. So yeah, and we have a free newsletter. So that's a great way to just kind of check out what's new and sign up for free. You get a little bonus ebook when you do that. And that way you can see what we're up to.
Nice.
Well, thank you again. It has been so much fun having you on our newish podcast. And you can find the show notes and links for this episode at passingtheplate.org/39. And be sure to head over to episode 287 of Lisa's podcast, Genealogy Gems, where we'll have a conversation on incorporating food into family history research.
Thanks,
And that was
ladies.
a lot of fun. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much
So
for
much
inviting me
fun.
to your show. And congratulations. This is an awesome topic.
Thank you so
much. And I so appreciate you letting us be on yours as well. And this has been a lot of fun. Ashley, I don't know if you know, but I actually learned to blog listening to Lisa's podcast. Do you remember talking about the variety show? She would do this series on how to blog, how to start a family history blog.
Oh, wow.
That's where I learned. So I would go walking. I'd drop the kids off at school, and then I would have her in the ear, and I'd go walking. And then I would try to figure out how to do it when I got home.
I love that.
Oh, you're so sweet.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Passing the Plate. We hope you enjoyed our journey into the world of food, traditions, and the amazing connections they create.
As always, it's been a pleasure sharing these delicious stories with you. Remember, food is more than just sustenance. It's a way to connect the dots between our past, present, and future.
And until next time, happy eating, happy connecting, and pass the plate. Head to passingtheplate.org/podcast for show notes.